Hi, it's Katrina.
Abandoned toxic base. In Greenland, there is an abandoned World War II facility that not only serves as a grim reminder of the war, but is also leaking toxic waste. Located on the remote island of Ikatek, it was first established back in 1941 as part of an agreement between the United States and Denmark. They called the base Bluey East 2, and the original agreement made the U.S. exempt from responsibility in the cleanup. After the war, the Americans simply abandoned the place in 1947 and never looked back. All these years later, the base is a ruin filled with countless barrels of leaded aviation fluid dotting the landscape. There are buildings filled with asbestos, broken down trucks everywhere, hundreds of cases of unused dynamite, and a lot of this stuff is actually leaking toxic waste. According to National Geographic, even more disturbing is that Bluey East 2 is only one of over 30 bases that the United States military built in Greenland throughout both World War II and the Cold War. All of them are in similar situations, abandoned and left to simply spill their toxic waste all over the ground. And for the people of Greenland, it's not great. They didn't even have a say in the matter, since Denmark technically owned the island until they gave the people autonomy in 1979. Since most people in Greenland hunt or fish, knowing that there are 30 bases leaking pollutants into the ocean and into the land is a bitter reminder of the past. More recently, a petition to clean up the mess reached the Danish parliament, who promised to pay around $25 million to clean up some of the old U.S. military bases. Greenland has also requested help from the U.S. to clean up Camp Century, a former secret base in the ice that also contains toxic waste that could be released at any moment. Only time will tell if the cleanup efforts are enough to finish the job. A lost attack plane. A Soviet ground attack plane was recently discovered in Poland. It's a Petlyakov PE-2, a terrifically rare find. Local villagers came across the wreckage of the plane completely by accident, with the original 2 crew members sadly still sitting inside the cockpit and even wearing their uniforms. They had all their personal items still on them, though the crew members themselves weren't much more than bones by the time they were rescued. The 2 men have since been removed from the wreckage and sent to Russia to be buried. The Polish villagers got stuck with the duty of dragging the wreckage out of the mucky swamp where it was found. They even disassembled some of the larger, more intact pieces and sent them to a nearby museum to be put on display. As for how the plane crashed here, it was part of a defensive line during what is called the Wehrmacht retreat in January of 1945. The pilots were participating in an offensive by the Soviets as they stormed across the Polish landscape and chased the Germans completely out of Poland. It was the final push before the ultimate capture of Berlin. This airplane was one of the victims of the chase. It apparently crashed and was completely forgotten about for 75 years. And to be honest, it's not the only piece of wreckage still hidden in this part of Poland from World War II. Roman Tower Fortress. A team of archaeologists working in the United Kingdom recently stumbled upon an ancient Roman fortress that had been converted by the Nazis into a war bunker back in World War II. It happened when Germany was occupying the Channel Islands between France and England. The fortress is known locally as the Alderney Nunnery. Archaeologists have found remains here that go all the way back to the medieval period, though the fortress was also used in the Tudor era and even by Napoleon. This place was popular. In total, it has been occupied for at least 2,000 years, and interestingly enough, it was also the site of the only 2 concentration camps to ever be constructed in British territory. Dr. Jason Monaghan, one of the archaeologists involved with the dig, told local news that the fortress is an extremely complex site. The original walls were damaged in the Middle Ages, a new part of the structure was built in the 18th century, but in 1793, the British Army demolished the interior of the fortress. In 1906, it was converted into a space to be used by military families. But it was the Nazis who used it last, fortifying the structure with their very own bunkers and adding concrete to the ancient walls to make them resistant to artillery. They eventually abandoned the fort at the beginning of the war, relinquishing the only British property they had managed to conquer throughout all of the fighting. The Nazi Eagle. A giant eagle over 800 pounds and gripping a swastika in its talons was recently discovered by Uruguay. However, just weeks after finding the incredible World War II artifact, They were ordered to sell the giant bronze Nazi eagle and get it out of the country. The eagle was originally mounted to the stern of a German battleship called the Admiral Graf Spee. The ship sank off the coast of South America at the very beginning of World War II. It was discovered again back in 2006 by private divers hired by the government of Uruguay. They didn't manage to get the entire battleship out of the water, but the eagle was quite a dramatic find. It was displayed briefly in Montevideo, but they were forced to put it in storage when Germany started protesting against the exhibition of Nazi paraphernalia. The Third Reich symbol has been the object of controversy for years, and the German government does not allow for things of this nature to be displayed to the public or sold unless it is placed in proper historical context, such as in a museum. So, to prevent an international conflict, the court of Uruguay ruled that the eagle must be sold off within 90 days, and the proceeds given to the salvage company who discovered the wreck. The Admiral Graf Spee managed to sink several merchant ships belonging to the Allies in the South Atlantic before a pair of British cruisers tracked it down, intercepted the vessel, and destroyed it on December 13, 1939. The captain was brought to the harbor in Montevideo, where he was forced to order the ship scuttled. The ship was sunk, then not seen again until just recently. The captain of the ship actually ended up dying a few days after his capture in a hotel in Buenos Aires. A lost mortar. In a small British village, Army technical officers were called in to carry out a controlled explosion. Citizens in the sleepy village of Codown and Ross River couldn't believe it when their tranquil existence was disrupted for a handful of hours. And all because one of their neighbors discovered a leftover mortar from World War II. The rusty device, still active and highly dangerous, stuffed with 2 pounds of high explosives, was found by a farmer named John Ross McMathuna. He had been using his metal detector in an old field when he came across the explosive, which was probably left over by the American Army stationed here during the war. Before D-Day, American soldiers had set up a training range here and had placed all kinds of bombs. It's no surprise that they left one behind. Luckily, the farmer knew exactly what to do. He made a few calls, the technical officers arrived, and before 10 o'clock in the morning, the bomb had been destroyed. Citizens woke up to quite the bang, and the grim reminder that their countryside is still riddled with unexploded ordnance that could go off at any minute. Metal detectorists, beware. Mystery of Flight 19. 75 years after the disappearance of Flight 19, the terrible tragedy still remains a mystery. It's actually no closer to being solved today than it was back in 1945. The incident took place on December 5th, less than 4 months after World War II ended. 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers left the Naval Air Station in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, scheduled to perform military exercises between Florida and Puerto Rico, in an area you might know as the Bermuda Triangle. Just after the exercises started, the weather turned bad. Radio contact was lost and the planes just kind of fell off the radar. The Navy scrambled together a search and rescue team, but the aircrafts were never found. All 14 airmen involved in the exercises were lost, and to make matters even more terrifying, so were all 13 of the crew members who went out looking for them as part of the rescue effort. In total, 27 souls were lost and never found. Even today, nobody has any clue where they went or what happened to them. There are a lot of theories surrounding the disappearance of Flight 19. Some say it was aliens, while some say it was some other paranormal phenomenon. The disappearance was actually one of the first things that gave the Bermuda Triangle its reputation as a black hole that swallows aircrafts and sea vessels alike. What do you think happened to Flight 19? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these. Amphibious tank. A giant amphibious tank was recently pulled out of the dirt after being found buried 30 feet deep in an English field. Excavators in England couldn't believe their luck when they uncovered the tank 74 years after it originally went missing. The story of the tank goes back to 1947, when over a dozen Buffalo LVT machines were taken to Lincolnshire, where they were to help the British Army with building their flood defenses. However, the flooding proved a bit too much for the amphibious tanks, and 5 of them were swept away. This particular one was never found. The discovery of the amphibious tank wasn't a total accident. It was a group of local military enthusiasts who set out to find it. It took them 5 days of digging, But they did finally strike gold. The craft itself is about 26 feet long, designed to transport supplies and troops across large bodies of water throughout Europe and in the Pacific region. This type of vehicle saw loads of action in all the greatest battles of World War II, including during the fighting on D-Day and at the Battle of Iwo Jima. Before this Buffalo LVT was swept away by the floods, it was used to transport soldiers across Germany's Rhine River in March of 1945. A soldier's body. The body of a German soldier was recently found buried in the Netherlands by someone looking for treasure using a metal detector. This guy had not expected to find a corpse when he went wandering out that morning. After his metal detector started beeping, he was thrilled to find a few pieces of ammunition, then even more excited when he uncovered dog tags. But they were still attached to the remains of a fallen soldier. He was a little less excited when he realized that he was standing on an unmarked grave. An investigation ended up being carried out by officials in the Netherlands. They determined that the body was that of a German man who had died during Operation Market Garden in 1944. The operation was carried out by the Allies, with the imperative of freeing the Netherlands from the occupying Germans. Thousands of paratroopers jumped out of the sky, captured key bridges, and liberated the most important areas. It was a total success, and a lot of Germans were killed in the fighting. This particular fellow must have been gunned down by the Allies while in his foxhole. Then somebody simply filled the foxhole in with dirt, burying the soldier and all his military equipment for the next 75 years. Nazi artifacts. A trove of Nazi artifacts has been discovered stashed inside the wall of a house in Germany. This shocking discovery was made by a history teacher while cleaning out his aunt's house in the city of Hagen. The house had been ravaged by a series of brutal floods, which had incidentally cracked open the wall where the artifacts were hiding. According to what Sebastian Yurtseven told local news, he got goosebumps when he saw the artifacts hidden there in the wall. They were stuffed into a small space, and he could tell right away that they were old. Thanks to a newspaper dated 1945, he knew exactly how old. Other than the newspaper, Sebastian found a portrait of Adolf Hitler, an old revolver, a pair of gas masks, brass knuckles, badges from the Nazi Party, as well as some letters and documents. The stash was filled with objects that once belonged to a Nazi. When Sebastian decided to do a bit of research, he learned that the building was once the headquarters for the National Socialist People's Welfare Organization, also known as the NSV. But when his aunt purchased the property in the 1960s, she had no idea about its grim past. Members of the organization probably hid their most important documents and their favorite pieces of Nazi memorabilia in the wall back in April of 1945, when Allied troops stormed the city. Bomb at a picnic. David and Karen Hibbert were mortified when they found an unexploded bomb at their family picnic. They were at Thoresby Park in Nottinghamshire with their two children, Bethany and Jessica, when David came across something interesting next to the river. At first, he thought it was a rusty old artifact, so he picked it up and brought it back to his wife, showing off his cool find. However, his wife actually dismissed him, saying it was nothing but a piece of garbage. David was a little disheartened. He tossed the piece of junk on the ground and kicked at it, and then he told his wife it sounded like metal. While David and Karen were both embarrassed when they did some quick internet research and figured out it really was a bomb. In fact, park authorities had already warned the public not to touch any mysterious objects that they came across. It's because the area was used as an army base during World War II. Even though most of the bombs had been cleared already, some were still suspected to be buried beneath the dirt. Clearly, David had stumbled onto one. Quite frankly, he was lucky he didn't blow up his entire family by kicking at the unexploded bomb. If the thing had gone off, it would have blown him, his wife, and their two children to smithereens. Once the couple realized that they were dealing with a real bomb, they moved quickly away from the object, called the authorities, and had them come deal with it. The Sword in the Stone. King Arthur and the Sword in the Stone is one of the oldest and most famous legends from ancient times. According to many versions of the story, the sword could only be pulled out of the stone by he who was the true King of England. And while the sword Excalibur, the very one that King Arthur himself pulled from the stone, has never been discovered, but an Italian version has. This is the sword of San Galgano, who lived back in the 12th century. He was born in 1148, became a wealthy noble, and later on trained as a knight. Near the end of his life, he went on to become a hermit. His conversion from knight to hermit happened after he had a vision of the archangel Michael. Michael appeared before San Galgano and urged him to renounce all of his worldly pleasures and become a hermit. So he did as he was told. His family and friends ridiculed him mercilessly for moving into a cave, but San Galgano didn't care. He even climbed to the top of Monte Siepi and thrust his sword into a stone as he renounced all his worldly desires. For the rest of his life, San Galgano lived alone as a hermit living in his faith. After he died in 1182, a circular church was constructed around the sword that was thrust into the stone. For some, it is this sword that went on to become the basis for the story of Arthur and his sword in the stone. But here's the weird part. The sword of San Galgano is 100% real. The sword has been in the stone ever since the 12th century, for over 800 years. Even though many thought the sword was fake for years, the metal and the style of the sword have all been dated, and it is officially recognized as an authentic ancient relic. But to this day, nobody knows how San Galgano got the thing into the stone, or how much of his legend is true. In the 12th century, around the same time the church was built around the real sword in the stone, poet Robert de Boron added a story to the legend of King Arthur that talked about a sword anchored in an anvil, and then over the years and the many translations, it was changed to a stone. Was it a different legend, or was this Italian one the inspiration? Most likely we'll never know. The Skafnung. The Skafnung stems from ancient Norse beliefs. It's an old and very powerful sword imbued with supernatural powers. If legends are to be believed, it belonged to the Danish king Hrolf-Kraki, one of the most heroic kings from Scandinavia. The Skafnung is considered to be the most powerful sword anywhere in the northern lands. It had powers such as supernatural sharpness, incredible hardness, and it also happened to contain the spirits of 12 of the most battle-hardened berserkers ever. One of the biggest issues surrounding this legendary artifact is that nobody knows if King Hrolf-Kraki ever existed at all. He may have just been a character who appeared in the story of Beowulf. But then again, he may have been a real Danish king. Nobody has any idea. All we know is that the legend of the sword goes back to at least the 13th century. It supposedly inflicts wounds which are unable to be healed. On the flip side, it heals all wounds inflicted upon the wielder of the sword, thanks to a magical healing stone. Unfortunately, most of us are pretty aware that healing stones and magical powers don't really exist. The sword itself may have been wielded by a powerful Danish king. It may have been a totally real artifact, but chances are it didn't have any magical powers. It was just the king might have been a master at wielding it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is, one might say, the Holy Grail of legendary artifacts. It's one of the most sacred objects that may or may not exist, spoken of in legends for 2,000 years, and hunted by just about everyone with a thirst for treasure. But do you know what the Holy Grail really is? It's supposed to be the cup or goblet that Jesus drank out of during the Last Supper. It was also used to collect his blood as he was being crucified. But much like everything having to do with Jesus Christ, its existence is a mystery. Most people believe it's an object from myth, meant to be a metaphor, while some others believe it's a legitimate artifact that's right here on Earth. If the Holy Grail does exist, it has quite a history. Some scholars believe the Knights Templar discovered the Holy Grail at a temple in the city of Jerusalem, and then stole it and hid it somewhere so secret that nobody has ever found it again. Some say the Holy Grail is hiding in the Montserrat Abbey near Barcelona in Spain, while others claim it's at the Chapel of the Chalice in Valencia. The truth is that nobody actually knows where it is, though there are plenty of theories. It could exist. It could even be sitting in somebody's cupboard as we speak, being used for someone's evening wine. The Sword of Charlemagne. Charlemagne is arguably the most important emperor in French history. He is also one of the most important figures in the history of Europe. He was the king of the Franks, which today we call the French. Charlemagne was born in 742. He ascended the throne as the sole ruler in 771 and went on to defeat many of the pagan groups still living in Europe, especially in Germany. He was declared by the Pope to be the first champion of the Catholic Church. Over 20 long years, he fought the Moors in Spain, the Saxons in Germany, and anyone else who got in his way. By the time he finally died in 814, just before he turned 72, he had left behind a legacy and dramatically changed Europe for the next 1,000 years to come. And he left some pretty cool artifacts behind. There are 2 swords that can be attributed to the Emperor Charlemagne. One is a saber currently kept in the Imperial Treasury in Vienna, Austria. The second is a sword being kept in the Louvre Museum in Paris. The sword in the Louvre is known as the Sword of Charlemagne, previously kept in a monastery by monks who believe the sword belonged to the great emperor. However, we don't know if this really is the most famous legendary sword in Europe. Some say it's too unlikely that Charlemagne's original sword survived in almost perfect condition for 1,200 years. These people claim the sword was crafted no earlier than 1150, meaning Charlemagne never touched it. The sword was never believed to have special powers, it just so happened to have belonged to the greatest French emperor ever. This makes it one of the most important European relics, but unfortunately, it might not even have been his. Bloodthirsty swords. The cursed Muramasa blades have a thirst for blood, and I'm not talking about one weapon here, but rather all the blades ever crafted by a man named Muramasa Sengo. As far as the Japanese myth goes, Muramasa was a famous swordsmith back during the days of feudal Japan, living in the 14th century. He built a school dedicated to sword forging and crafted the best swords anywhere in the country, often selling them to important generals and warriors. However, legend says that he attached a dark curse to many of his weapons. The curse has a lot to do with Muramasa himself, as he was apparently insane and prone to violent fits of rage. His unstable personality is said to have leaked into the weapons that he crafted. This caused those who wielded his swords to become enveloped by bloodlust, insanity, and violent rage. There are stories of sword wielders killing their families, cutting down their allies, and even going into uncontrollable fits of anger, in which they slash apart every single person near them. And it's all because of the Muramasa curse. Where history is concerned, Muramasa Sengo was a very real person. He really did make swords in the 14th century, and some of those swords are still around today, still allegedly cursed. Pandora's box. Most people have heard the expression, "Don't open Pandora's box." But have you ever wondered what Pandora's box really is? Is this a real artifact? Some great magical box that wreaked destruction on the ancient world? The truth is that the myth of Pandora has been around for thousands of years. The story is almost always told the same. In Greek mythology, Pandora was the first woman created by Zeus to punish the human race, after Prometheus stole fire from Mount Olympus. She was perfect, made out of clay and taught all kinds of charm and skills by the gods. When she was brought to life, she was engaged to Prometheus's brother and given a box, actually a jar, as a gift, but she could never open it. Of course, who can resist the call of a mystery box? She couldn't resist, as the gods knew would happen, and when she opened it, she accidentally unleashed evil upon the planet. Pandora's box contained all the horrors of the world: famine, disease, war, but as soon as she realized what she had done, she snapped the box shut, keeping hope inside. But just where is this girl's box? Well, there may not actually be a box. Some of the earliest versions of the Pandora myth have her opening a sealed pottery vase or a jar, something known as a pithos in ancient Greek. The actual translation would be something like Pandora's pottery vase, but obviously this doesn't really sound that appealing in the English language. Somewhere along the way, pottery vase was changed to box. The story is a metaphor demonstrating human weakness and explaining the cause for all the bad things in the world. Nobody has ever found evidence of a mythical box or a vase that unleashed evil, so it was probably never a real artifact. And if it is real, it's probably better that Pandora's box is never found at all, like Jumanji. Do you think Pandora's box could have been a real artifact in some form or another? Let me know in the comments below. The Sword of Roland. Durandal is the legendary Sword of Roland. Not much is known about Roland today, as he's not nearly as popular as the other figures like Robin Hood or King Arthur. In the old legends, Roland is said to be the nephew of Emperor Charlemagne, the man I told you about earlier. Roland had a prime position in Charlemagne's court as the greatest warrior in the 12 peers. a group kind of like Charlemagne's personal bodyguards. The most famous story of Roland is the Battle of Roncesvalles, in which the European Christian forces faced off against the Muslims. Keep in mind that this battle actually happened, so there is a possibility that Roland was there in the flesh. The epic poem, The Song of Roland, explains that the sword Durandal was given to Charlemagne by an angel, and then passed down to Roland to use in his final stand. Other versions of the story claim the sword was that of the Trojan warrior Hector, given to Roland directly by a magician. But what made the sword so legendary was that it was adorned with sacred relics, some of which could be real. A tooth from St. Peter, the blood of St. Basile, hairs from St. Denis, and even a scrap of the robe worn by St. Mary. Thanks to all the artifacts, the sword had incredible holy power. Unfortunately, nobody knows how much of the story is true. The sword could exist, but we don't even know if Roland was a real person, or just a character in an old poem. When you go that far back, history and myth just blurs together. The seven-branched sword. The seven-branched sword of Japan is a very unusual artifact. It's called the tachi in Japanese and was discovered back in 1945 at the Isonokami Shrine. This place is located in the Nara Prefecture, one of the oldest and most sacred parts of Japan. The Shinto shrine has a history going back 2,000 years and is home to the most important and most sacred relics in the country. The tachi sword is unusual in the way it looks, as it has 3 pairs of protrusions sticking out from either side. It wouldn't have been very useful in actual fighting, as there wasn't much edge to slash an enemy with. But that's okay, as experts say the sword was likely for ceremonial purposes. The big mystery is that nobody knows exactly what ceremonies the blade was used for. There was once an inscription on the blade inlaid with gold, claiming it had magical power and could fight off enemy forces. However, nobody knows who the sword belonged to or where it came from, making it one of the most legendary weapons in the world, whose legend itself has been lost. Fragments of the cross. Archaeologists working at an ancient church in Turkey recently claimed to have found fragments of an artifact that could rock the religious world. This particular relic was found inside of a stone chest, taken from the ruins of a 7th century church. According to the lead archaeologist on the project, Gulgun Koroglu, the object in the chest is the holiest of holy artifacts, a piece of the cross upon which Jesus Christ was allegedly crucified. She says the fragment was carved with a small cross, and also that it's the most important artifact that she has ever uncovered. As you can imagine, Jesus' physical cross has been the object of great religious interest and global controversy. There are multiple churches around the globe that claim to possess a small fragment of the wooden cross, but none of these fragments have ever been properly authenticated. It's almost impossible to determine if the fragment really did belong to this particular cross, as there is no way to know and nothing to compare it to. Crucifixions during Roman times were quite common and have been going on for thousands of years. And so the mystery continues. Sun Wukong's magic staff. The Ruyi Jingu Bang, better known as the staff of Sun Wukong, is a magical weapon once wielded by the immortal monkey from Chinese legend. The weapon is described in myths as being a pillar of black iron at least 20 feet long, banded with gold on each end. The Chinese name for the staff translates to English a little strangely as the compliant golden hooped rod. The magical staff is handed over to Sun Wukong by a dragon queen living in the underwater kingdom of Aoguang, with it previously being used by Yu the Great to measure the depths of the water after the great flood that blanketed the earth. The story of Sun Wukong and his magic staff really is nothing but a story. There were no immortal monkeys running around in China during the 16th century. Plus, the magic staff is said to shrink or grow at the whim of its owner. It can also make copies of itself, and when Sun Wukong isn't using it, he shrinks it to the size of a needle and keeps it stashed behind his ear like a toothpick. But even though the monkey staff is one artifact that archaeologists are likely never to find, it does have a prominent place in popular culture in ways that a lot of people don't realize. For example, in the Dragon Ball franchise, Son Goku's staff is named Nayoi Bo, which translates from the Chinese Ruyi Bang. Goku himself is actually based on Sun Wukong, so it's no surprise that they also gave him the magic staff. The Arctic Henge. Located near the Arctic Circle in one of Iceland's northernmost and most remote settlements, the Arctic Henge is a Norse pagan monument consisting of various stone arches and statues. It looks incredibly ancient, but didn't exist until 1996, and it's still under construction. The site only consists of a handful of structures right now, but it will eventually dwarf Stonehenge. The Arctic Henge is dedicated to the beliefs of the Old Norse, known as the Asatru. Once it's finished, it will consist of 4 large stone monuments encircled by 72 blocks, each inscribed with the name of a dwarf from the Eddic poem Völuspá. The 10th century poem describes how the world was created, how it will end, and its eventual rebirth. Researchers consider it a cornerstone of Norse mythology and one of the most important primary sources on the topic. It was written the century before Iceland became Christian, but some scholars argue that it contains evidence of Christian influences. This is possible because, at the time, Iceland may have been undergoing a transitional period between paganism and Christianity. Many argue that for a long time, the two religions would have probably coexisted peacefully. Even after Iceland declared Christianity as its official religion, some people continued to practice paganism in private. This was tolerated, unlike in some other places, including mainland Scandinavia, enabling these traditions to survive to some degree in Iceland. The Arctic Henge will help to keep the past alive. Each part of the monument's layout reflects a different aspect of Norse belief. Once it's finished being built, visitors will be able to observe the midnight sun through different structures and vantage points depending on the season. Kuckelbauer Tower. The German town of Abensberg is home to Kuckelbauer's Bierwelt, or Beer World, which consists of a brewery and a beer garden. It's been run by the same family since it was established in 1904. Local legend claims that Kuckelbauer's famous wheat beer is brewed by dwarves. During the 1990s, owner Leonard Salek set out on a mission to build an eccentric, fairy tale-inspired tower on the property. The hard part was trying to convince someone to do it. Austrian architect Friedensreich Hundertswasser initially rejected Salek's request for help designing the structure. Salek contacted him again with a story about the Weissbier dwarves of Abensberg. In the tale, he described how the dwarves saw brewing as an art form and how the practice relates closely to nature. In his request for help, Salek wrote that the dwarves needed a home. Would that convince you to help him build a tower? As a nature lover, Hundertwasser was sold on the idea. He responded to the effect of saying that the people at Salek's company were crazy, but that he'd do it. Hundertwasser died before construction began in 2007, while the tower was still in its planning stage. Capped with an onion-like dome, the cartoonish, whimsical structure stands at 114 feet tall. Its designers originally wanted it to be twice the height, but local law forbids buildings from being taller than the town's church. Inside, there are around 4,200 Weissbier glasses from all over the world on display. The company claims that it's the world's biggest Weissbier glass collection. Each level of the tower contains a mosaic depicting a different part of the brewing process, and the beer garden at the foot of the structure is filled with animated dwarf statues demonstrating their craft. Do you want to visit here? Let me know in the comments below. Sherwood Forest. Distinguishing between fact and fiction is a very complicated matter when it comes to the story of Robin Hood, but his legendary home is a very real place. Located in Nottinghamshire, England, Sherwood Forest has been around since sometime during the last glacial period, between 115,000 and 11,700 years ago. The 1,046-acre site is the remnant of what was once a much larger royal hunting forest. It's filled with ancient oak trees that are more than 500 years old. A legendary tree called the Major Oak, which supposedly served as Robin Hood's hideout, is estimated to be between 800 and 1,000 years old and has a trunk circumference of 30 feet. It's so big, its limbs are supported by scaffolding. No matter what really happened in the past, that tree has seen a lot. Sherwood Forest is also home to a meeting place called Thinghow, where people used to come to discuss issues and settle disputes between the 14th and 17th centuries. The site was rediscovered around 2005 after being lost to history. Characters with names similar to Robin Hood began appearing in folklore during the 13th century, and stories of Robin Hood himself emerged around 200 years later, according to the official Sherwood Forest website. For the many people who embrace Robin Hood's dedication to protecting the poor and standing up against tyranny, the forest is a special and meaningful place. Triveni Sangam. Every 12 years, millions of people flock to the Maha Kumbh Mela, a months-long festival in India that is so big it can reportedly be seen from space. It's the largest human gathering on Earth, and it dates back roughly 2,000 years. The festival takes place at the Triveni Sangam, where 3 sacred rivers meet. The confluence of the highly revered Yamuna and Ganges rivers is marked by the distinct difference in the color of the water. The Ganges is brown, while the Yamuna is greenish in color, making it easy to identify their meeting point. But what about the third river? Known as the Saraswati, it's a mythical body of water that allegedly dried up thousands of years ago. Some believe that it flows underground. According to Hindu belief, bathing at the Triveni Sangam will cleanse a person of their sins and free them from the cycle of rebirth, enabling them to attain a spiritual state of freedom called moksha. The festival's dates are calculated based on astrological predictions of when the water will turn into nectar. This mythological substance is said to have rained down on the Triveni Sangam during a battle between gods and demons, and it can supposedly make someone immortal. An estimated 100 million people attended the last Maha Kumbh Mela in 2013. Giant's Causeway. Located along Ireland's northern coast in County Antrim, the Giant's Causeway is a collection of 40,000 polygonal interlocking basalt columns. This seemingly otherworldly site was created between 50 and 60 million years ago, when a massive volcanic eruption spewed molten basalt and formed a plateau. As the basalt cooled, the lava contracted and cracked in a similar way to how mud dries, forming the geometric-looking pillars that exist today. According to Gaelic mythology, an Irish giant named Finn McCool built the columns as a causeway across the North Channel after a Scottish giant named Benandonner challenged him to a fight. Realizing that his opponent was much larger than him, Finn fled back across the causeway to his wife, Sadb, who dressed him as a baby. Benandonner mistook the disguise as Finn's giant baby and began to wonder how big Finn himself must be. Benandonner turned and ran back across the causeway to Scotland, destroying much of it along the way so that Finn couldn't chase him. The Giant's Causeway attracts visitors who are intrigued by it both as a geological oddity and the scene of a mythical battle. Ireland is definitely on my bucket list. Who wants to go with me? Big shout out to Efrain Rivera and Kevin R. Thanks so much for watching. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe because we have lots more videos like these coming up. Dracolimni. The Dracolimni, or the Dragon Lakes, are a collection of lakes that sit high in the mountains of northwestern Greece. The 2 most famous lakes are located over 6,000 feet above sea level on Mount Tymphi and Mount Smolikas. According to local legend, 2 enemy dragons who once lived in the region created the unusual landscape by throwing rocks and pines at each other. While there are no dragons there today, there are alpine newts. Native to continental Europe, these amphibious creatures spend most of the year in the forest and migrate to the water to breed. Visitors who have hiked to the Dracolimni report that it's a tough journey that is most appropriate for people who are in good shape, but the serene views and peaceful silence are reportedly worth the trouble. The majestic sights at the Dracolimni of Tymphi have earned it a reputation for resembling a scene from Game of Thrones. Tintagel Castle. Located on the Tintagel Island Peninsula in North Cornwall, England, Tintagel Castle was a medieval fortification and the home of Cornwall's rulers between the 5th and 7th centuries. Richard, the 1st Earl of Cornwall, built a castle on the site during the 13th century, and what's left of it remains there today in ruins. During the 12th century, British cleric Geoffrey of Monmouth named Tintagel Castle as the place where the legendary King Arthur was conceived. The story appeared in the author's mythological account of British history, Historia Regum Britanniae, History of the Kings of Britain. According to legend, the wizard Merlin used sorcery to disguise Arthur's father, King Uther Pendragon, as Gorloy, the Duke of Cornwall, and husband of Arthur's mother, Ingrain. Uther Pendragon and Gorloy were embroiled in an ongoing feud, and Ingrain was sent to Tintagel Castle as a place of refuge. By appearing as Gorloy with Merlin's help, Uther Pendragon got into Tintagel Castle, where he impregnated Ingrain and fathered Arthur. Many researchers have challenged the validity of these claims, stating that there is no actual evidence of King Arthur having a connection to the site, but Tintagel Castle is, nevertheless, steeped in history. Roman artifacts have been found at the site, indicating that it was was occupied much earlier than originally thought, but archaeologists have not found any signs of a structure existing during that time. Experts once believed that Tintagel Castle was a 7th century monastery, but this was ruled out in favor of the theory that the site became a royal residence when it was part of the Kingdom of Dumnonia. Chocolate Hills. The Bohol province in the Philippines is home to over 1,260 hills, known as the Chocolate Hills. They are spread over a 20-square-mile area throughout the towns of Carmen, Batuan, and Sagbayan, and are nicknamed for the brown shade that they turn during the dry season, making them look like endless rows of Hershey's Kisses. Made from limestone, these conical symmetrical hills typically measure between 98 and 164 feet high, with the tallest standing at 390 feet. According to legend, 2 feuding giants created the hills by hurling rocks and boulders at each other. Another story claims that the mounds were formed from a crying giant's tears. A third myth holds that the hills are the dried feces of carabaos, a type of water buffalo that's native to the Philippines. Scientists, on the other hand, say that the Chocolate Hills were created by limestone erosion and tectonic processes. Well, that's boring. I prefer the giants theory. How about you? Mount Olympus. Standing at nearly 10,000 feet, Mount Olympus is the tallest mountain in Greece. It's the mythical home of the 12 Olympian gods and goddesses, including Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Apollo, and Aphrodite. Located in Thessaly along the border between Greece and Macedonia, Mount Olympus has 52 peaks and is filled with deep gorges. Its highest peak, Mytikas, is where the ancient Greeks believed the Olympian deities lived. The mountain is also famous for its biodiversity and natural beauty. Mount Olympus formed from sedimentary rock in a shallow sea around 200 million years ago. Roughly 1 million years ago, it was covered by glaciers, leading to the formation of its plateaus and depressions. The mountain's nearly vertical peaks and other striking features were also created from geological processes long ago. Records of humans living around Mount Olympus date at least as far back as the 4th century BC. During the Ottoman Empire's 400-year rule, the mountain served as a hideout for anti-Ottoman insurgents and Greek Christian soldiers. It also functioned as the center of the Greek resistance during the German occupation of the country from 1941 to 1944. A few years later, in 1946, the Greek Civil War began nearby. There are numerous monuments and landmarks throughout the area, including the Chapel of the Prophet Elias. It's the world's highest altitude Orthodox Christian church. The most important archaeological site at Mount Olympus is Dion, a sacred city of the ancient Macedons. Dedicated to the 12 Olympians, the settlement flourished between the 5th century BC and the 5th century AD. Excavations are ongoing and have yielded Macedonian, Hellenistic, and Roman artifacts. Tono. Less than 30,000 people live in Tono, a small city located on the Japanese island of Honshu and is surrounded by mountains. The area was first settled by hunter-gatherers sometime during the Jomon period, which lasted from 14,000 to 300 BC, and it's been continuously inhabited ever since. Nicknamed the City of Folklore, Tono is famous for its rural scenery, traditional farming culture, and its appearance in The Legends of Tono, a collection of folktales written by Japanese author Kunio Yanagita in 1910. One of these stories tells of elusive troll-like creatures called kappa, who are often found near water and are known to be mischievous. They resemble humanoid turtles and enjoy snacking on children and cucumbers. Statues and images of them can be found throughout Tono. Yanagita also wrote about spirit-like beings called Zashiki Warashi, who live in parlors and storage rooms. They enjoy pranking humans, and it's said that a human who sees one will experience good fortune. These stories were passed down orally from one generation to the next before Yanagita wrote them down. He worked with a Tono native to put the collection together, and the tales continue to be told today. Each year, Tono hosts several festivals, storytelling performances, and other events in honor of the city's folklore. Visitors can also check out the region's thatched roof farmhouses and learn about the traditional way of life in Tono's 3 folk villages. Death to the chef. In China, there is a rare delicacy in which a professional chef creates a soup from the flesh of a very dangerous spitting cobra. It's not an easy thing to catch and skin cobras, especially not ones that can literally spit venom in your face. But it is a delicacy, and people will pay big bucks for the soup. For Peng Fan, a chef in southern China, his attempt at cooking this strange soup turned fatal when tragedy bit him right where it hurts. Here's what happened to the unfortunate chef. He chopped off the head of a spitting cobra. Next, he proceeded to spend about 20 minutes making the rare soup. He cut up the cobra's body into pieces, he prepared all the herbs and spices, sliced up its skin, and everything was turning out just swell. It was after the dish was prepared that he began to tidy up his kitchen. When he picked up the decapitated snake head to throw it in the garbage, it lashed out and bit him. Unfortunately for the brave chef, the spitting cobra has neurotoxins in its venom that can kill a person in under 30 minutes. The toxin works to paralyze a person so that they stop breathing. And while anti-venom is available, the chef didn't happen to have any in his kitchen. According to one of the guests at the restaurant who was present during the catastrophe, there was suddenly a lot of commotion from the kitchen. People started screaming for a doctor, but by the time paramedics arrived, well, the chef was already dead. Russian petting zoo gone wrong. In Russia, not even petting zoos are safe. A little girl, only 5 years old, was visiting a place called Butterflies Park Petting Zoo when her day went terribly wrong. Her name is Victoria, and she was playing with a rufous-beaked snake when the predator curled around her neck and then bit her right on the face. It was only after the bite that she was informed the snake was kind of venomous. A staff member was quick to remove the reptile, but the damage was already done. It had bitten her right on the cheek, injecting her with a serious dose of danger. You would think any kind of venomous snake would be off limits at a petting zoo for children, but apparently not in Russia. The rufous-beaked snake is a native of East Africa, and although it's not deadly, its venom can do some damage, especially to children and especially if bitten on the face. The little girl had to be taken to the hospital. The petting zoo called an ambulance. The zoo staff insisted that such an incident had never happened before, and in the end, nobody got sued. The poor kid luckily recovered, and she went home with a small bandage on her face and what will probably turn out to be a deeply ingrained fear of all things slithery. Have you ever been bitten by a snake? What happened? Let us all know in the comments below. Monster anaconda. A massive and horrifying snake was recently encountered by a group of tourists swimming through a river in the Amazonian jungle of Brazil. The beast was unlike anything they had seen before, a wild anaconda that measured upwards of 23 feet long. I mean, they were swimming in the Amazon. It was spotted by the tourists slithering through the long grass, no more than an arm's length away from them. It was just lurking in the undergrowth, so big and powerful it could have easily eaten them in mere seconds. According to one of the tourists, Daniel Alexander from Rio de Janeiro, it was a terrifying encounter straight out of the movie Anaconda. He had gone to the Formoso River, located near the border of Paraguay and Bolivia, fully aware that it's a hot zone for anacondas. And while the tourists had expected they might encounter a snake or two, they had no idea they would see a fully grown monster. And to give you an idea of just how enormous this serpent was, it stretched nearly 5 whole feet longer than the largest wild Burmese python ever caught in Florida. That's almost as tall as me, and that was the extra length. Back in 2020, hunters tracked down a snake in the Sunshine State that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission recorded at 18 feet and 9 inches. It was just a baby compared to the monster anaconda from Brazil. Luckily, the tourists didn't end up getting eaten. Instead, they got just close enough to film the monstrous creature slithering through the water before hightailing it out of there. Snake invasion. A woman in Australia recently suffered from a home invasion, but this was no ordinary home invader. It was a deadly serpent that just about killed her. Sarah Kirkman says that the snake broke into her house and then made a giant mess in her living room. When she came home after a day out, she found her living room a disaster and an extremely venomous red-bellied snake was sitting on top of her TV. Just try to imagine that for a second, a snake that could kill you with one bite lounging on your television. But just wait, because the story gets even more shocking. Sarah says this was the 4th time in just 1 month that one of these reptiles broke into her house. She was the victim of a snake plague. Just days before she found the snake on her TV, she had walked into her laundry room, heard a hissing sound, and looked down to see yet another red-bellied snake close enough to bite her foot. To make matters even worse, when Sarah called her local snake removal expert, he was away on vacation. So she called the next best thing, her neighbor, to help get the snake out of her home. We don't know if she's been invaded again since this incident, but we do know that the red-bellied snake can grow to be 4 feet long. Its venom can induce nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and in the most serious cases, even death. Frisky sea snakes. Venomous sea snakes have been confusing divers for potential mates and almost killing them. There have been a heap of recent reports coming from scuba divers that deadly olive sea snakes are swimming up to them while underwater as if ready to bite their faces off. However, scientists have been stumped as to why the snakes are acting so aggressively. A new study reveals that the snakes are probably just lovesick and maybe even a little frisky. To understand this a bit better, we need to take a look at the anatomy of the male sea snake. They can't see very well. When mating season comes around, male sea snakes typically have to chase females so that they can procreate. A lot of females will run away and hide, and the male snakes have to track them down. While they're in the middle of tracking down their shy mates, these male snakes tend to speed towards anything that even resembles a snake because they have such bad sight. So, while divers are swimming at the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, the male snakes mistake them for their female companions. Believe it or not, this is why none of these encounters have actually turned deadly. Once the olive sea snake gets close enough to realize that the human is not its serpent lover, they take off to continue their search. This is good news, because the olive sea snake has evolved fast-acting venom and are some of the most dangerous creatures in the world. They typically hunt fish underwater, so their venom needs to act quickly to paralyze the fish before it can escape. When that same venom is injected into humans, it can cause immediate paralysis, which often results in the person drowning because they can't swim up to the surface. Snake invasion. A woman living in the Houston area of Texas recently had a rather unpleasant encounter with a snake in her home. The woman's name is Ashley Robinson, and she managed to catch a video of her disturbing encounter, which she shared online. The terrifying incident occurred when she heard a bird squawking at her front door. She didn't understand what the bird wanted, or why it was squawking so much, so she opened the door to see what was going on. When the door swung wide open, a snake fell into her house. As it turned out, the bird was squawking because the snake was trying to eat it. Unfortunately for Ashley, she closed the door too late. By the time she slammed it shut, the snake had already gotten into her house and was lingering in her foyer. She had no idea what to do with the snake curled up next to the door, literally blocking her escape. But Ashley was one tough customer. She gathered her strength, picked up a broom, and shooed the snake out the door like a real professional. Later on, after she uploaded the horrifying footage online, she learned the snake hadn't actually been venomous. Instead, it was a non-lethal rat snake. They may grow to be huge and scary looking, but they can't actually kill a person. What would you do if a snake invaded your house when you opened the door? Tell me your escape plan in the comments below. And I want to give a big shout out to Buckeye Boy Moto and Nandika, who is a new subscriber. Thanks so much for watching, and if you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Origins Explained family. The bridesmaid dog. A dog was scheduled to be a bridesmaid at a wedding in Australia. Unfortunately, the canine had to miss the ceremony after it had an ugly encounter with a very venomous snake just a few days before the wedding. Dan and Brittany Atlas from the small city of Toowoomba had already delayed their wedding ceremony because of the COVID panini. But when things started to clear up, they secured the date and everything was good to go. Their 2 dogs, Ruby and Lily, were chosen to be their bridesmaids. Just 4 days before the wedding ceremony, though, an eastern brown snake somehow got into their house and bit their dog. When Dan arrived home from work, he found Ruby, their beloved mastiff, suffering from a venomous snake bite. They had to race her to the veterinarian, where she was given treatment and kept under observation for 18 hours. The vets had to give her 2 whole vials of anti-venom. The dog was so close to death that by the time the wedding was due to happen 4 days later, she was still sick and couldn't attend. According to Brittany, the incident made the wedding difficult. Even on such a happy day, she couldn't think of anything except her dog. And even though Ruby missed the wedding, she did make a full recovery and is happy and healthy today. Python in the toilet. A woman in Texas was forced to dial 911 after she found a python hiding out in her toilet. This is probably the last place you would want to find a python, especially if you didn't notice it in the toilet until you'd already sat down. To make matters worse, Patty Tidwell, the unfortunate victim in this situation, made the disturbing discovery at 3:30 in the morning. She got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and almost had a heart attack when she flipped the light switch and saw the huge reptile stretched across the toilet bowl. The snake flicked its forked tongue at her and Patty slammed the door in its face. You can't really blame her for what happened next. She called 911 in a panic. If you found a snake in your toilet, you would probably call the police too. An officer showed up just a little while later to help wrangle the serpent out of the house. As for how it got into Patty's toilet in the first place, it was probably an escaped pet that made its way all the way into Patty's bathroom through her plumbing. Since the incident, Patty has started putting bricks on the toilet lid to keep it closed at night. She also told reporters that she is too scared most of the time to even sit on the toilet. Sleeping with a snake. A man in India was sleeping on the floor of his temple when he woke up beside one of the most venomous snakes in the entire world, a cobra. He had put down a mat on the hard floor of the temple and was lying there with a thin blanket. The cobra must have thought it looked pretty cozy under there with him, because it slithered under his blanket, waking the man up in a sudden fright. It just wanted to cuddle. Terrified and shocked, the man jumped up and tried to run away, but his panic frightened the cobra, which then started lunging at him. It was trying to sink its fangs into one of his legs. Luckily, the snake missed, and the man managed to get far enough away that the cobra just kind of gave up. The cobra slithered under a bench, took off from the temple, and was not seen again. Had the man been bitten, it wouldn't actually have been a huge surprise. Indian cobras are responsible for the most snake bites given to humans anywhere in the country. Yet despite their danger, they are a protected species under the Indian Wildlife Protection Act. Burst belly. A giant Burmese python over 15 feet in length was recently caught trying to swallow a whole cow. These snakes are notorious for biting off more than they can chew, literally. Because they are able to swallow animals significantly larger than themselves, they sometimes go after animals that are a little too big. After the snake tried to eat the cow, a farmer in northern Thailand discovered it dead in his grass pasture, with its stomach burst open. Although the farmer didn't physically see what happened, it was pretty obvious by the evidence. The cow must have been grazing when the monster snake came up and stuffed it into his mouth. But the cow proved too big, and when the snake tried to move it through his digestive system, the dead, half-digested cow literally burst out of its belly. The farmer described the aftermath of this disastrous meal as a seriously scary scene. Thanks for watching! What's your scariest snake encounter? Which story did you like the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Bye!